Hello and welcome back to CamBro Conversations. Today's conversation, I'm joined by Steve Adcock, entrepreneur and writer. Steve, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And when I was thinking about questions to ask you, the first one that sprung immediately to my mind is, what is FIRE?
Well, FIRE is an acronym that stands for Financially Independent Retire Early. And those are two very, very separate, distinct concepts. The FI part, the financial independence part, means you have accumulated enough net worth, and most of your net worth is probably going to be invested, whether in the stock market or the or in real estate or any other types of investments. You've accumulated enough money where you can sustain your lifestyle without having to work another job. You might still choose to work if you love your job. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you are FI, that means you don't have to work. You can quit today and be just fine for the rest of your life. And then the second part of that is like taking that next step to RE, the retire early part, where you do actually quit your job and you more or less do whatever you want for the rest of your life. I think there's a big misnomer about what retirement means if you pursue FIRE. It's not a traditional, you're 65 or 70 or older and you're sitting in your rocking chair with a shotgun in your hand yelling at your neighbor kids to get off your lawn. That's not typically what happens when you're a young person who achieves FIRE. You move on to other things, whether it's writing or blogging or whatever, that really that sparks a passion within you that you probably didn't have a lot of time to pursue when you were working a full-time job.
Yeah, I think that's such a perfect, succinct explanation because I wasn't massively familiar with the term in the UK, and I don't think a lot of us are. But we were joking that you're looking to spread the fire, Steve, based on the content that you create. And it's certainly an area that I've started to fall down the rabbit hole on because it's a very interesting concept. I think a lot of us chase financial freedom, financial independence, but the retiring early part is not something that many of us consider to do so early, particularly as early as you managed to achieve.
Yeah. And when I tell my story, I mean, yeah, there definitely is the early retirement part, but yeah, I retired at 35, and I'm not going to kid anybody out there by saying, yeah, anybody will be able to retire at 35. In fact, most people won't be able to retire at 35. So, to anybody listening to this podcast, I don't want you to keep that number in mind, retiring by 35, because that's just not going to be possible for many of us. However, I do think that retiring early is possible for a large majority of people out there who live in the first world, right? Where you have you have all of your basic necessities covered, plus some, you work a pretty good job, you work good, you make good money. If you're in that boat, which I think a lot of your listeners probably are, I think it is possible to retire early, whether that means at 40 or at 50 or at 55, whatever. It's going to look different for you, but I think just keeping the concept of retiring early and not retiring at 35, I think it's going to be easier to kind of accept this concept and how it might actually work for your life.
Yeah, I can understand that. And so retiring at 35, Steve, your own story is going to help us bring this concept to life, isn't it? Because we can all talk about theory and concepts, but having this real life anecdotal example in front of us is going to be really, really helpful. What were the driving factors in your head to decide that 35 was an age that you wanted to stop working in the corporate world forever?
Well, I never really liked working a job in corporate America is it just drains the life out of you. I worked in IT, information technology, so I was a software developer, which means you make pretty good money, and that's great. I mean, that's absolutely how I was able to retire at 35 because I worked a high paying job and I saved the majority of what I made. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need a high paying job in order to retire early. I think there's lots of things that you could do to make that possible for you. But for me, it really came down to not liking what I was doing. And initially, I set the bar at 40. I wanted to retire at 40. And I was married. I just got married at the time, and we combined finances. She's a rocket scientist, by the way, an actual rocket scientist. I actually made a little bit more money than her, but she made really good money too. So combined, we were probably pulling down about $220,000 by the end of our career. So that should give you a little bit of context, I think, for how these numbers come into play. So we combine our finances, we save as much as we possibly can, we invest as much as we possibly can. And I'm talking 70%, 70% of our combined income, we were saving or investing. And we were only living off of 30%. So we really dialed back our expenses and our lifestyle, frankly. And then that number went down to 38. So maybe we can retire. Maybe I could retire at 38 instead of 40. That would be great. But as we continue down this early retirement financial independence road, that snowball just built and compound interest started working for me. And I was like, holy hell, maybe I could do this at 35 instead. And that's ultimately what happened. I did quit my job at 35. She quit at 33. I want to say, and we've just been living a very frugal, but not a life of sacrifice, but we also don't spend a whole lot of money, but we know what makes us happy. And I think that's a crucial part of this whole element too.
Yeah, there's so many questions popping off in my head while I was listening to you there, Steve. And the first of them is around your IT job, I guess. Obviously, a highly skilled job, well paid. Was there other corporate jobs that you thought you might have looked at rather than going down this retirement route? Did you think you could have maybe pivoted in other industries and applied your skill set there?
Believe it or not, I legitimately considered becoming a truck driver. I don't know why. I don't know what it was. Just something appealing about being a truck, like life on the road. You never take your work home with you, even though a lot of truck drivers live in their cabs. So you're literally where your work is. But put that aside. And there was something about that whole thing that intrigued me. I never went down that road, and in the end, I'm glad I didn't. But yeah, I toyed with maybe changing careers, but in the end, it wasn't the work necessarily. It was the environment of having to work, of having to commute to a full-time job, and having to listen to bosses and mission statements and working overtime. That is what I didn't like. And I knew I was going to have that almost anywhere I worked. So I came to the realization that, if I'm going to have a full-time job, I might as well get paid a bunch of money for it. And that's, I didn't change careers. I just stuck with it. I saved as much as I could. I'm ultimately really glad it worked out that way. Because I figured, well, if I'm going to work, might as well make as much money as I can.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. If there's a level of unhappiness that full-time work was going to give you, it might as well be the highest paying version to enable freedom further down the line, rather than maybe you worked as a truck driver and earned like less than half of what you were maybe earning. I don't know what the truck driver rates are. They've actually gone up a lot in the UK recently with some of the supply chain challenges. Some
Oh,
of
I
the
bet.
drivers are making a lot more money now. It's a career that people are exploring, weirdly enough. But when you were, maybe if you considered working in another role to earn less money, you're just prolonging the agony, so to speak, rather than speeding up the process where you were just earning as much, you weren't enjoying yourself, but ultimately it was going to lead to freedom at 35, which is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I may have been a little bit happier, maybe, but I mean, even that wasn't a guarantee. If I changed careers, there was no guarantee that would actually make me happy. But the one thing I did know is it was definitely going to push my retirement age back. And that's just not a risk that I was willing to take at the time.
Yeah, I suppose if you assessed your values, the kind of primary value was freedom as soon as physically possible. So
Exactly.
let's just grit our teeth and get through it. You spoke about 70% of your income being saved or invested. The kind of figure that a lot of people band about in my age group to actually invest is like, can you invest 10 to 15% of your post-tax salary in order to be potentially financially in a strong position when you're 40, 45, if you start very young, so when you're in your early 20s. So to put that up 7x to 70% is absolutely incredible. And I wonder, like, what were your materialistic desires like in terms of your spending? Like, how frugal or how fiscally aware were you to move the dial from this kind of traditional good aim point for people up to the extreme end of that?
Yeah, I think one of the most outdated piece of financial advice out there is save 10% and you'll be good. I mean, 10% is better than nothing, but you're probably not going to achieve the retirement that you have in your head by only saving, by only investing 10%. But like you said, I mean, there's a huge delta between 10% and 70%. You certainly don't have to save 70% to retire. But on our time frame, my number one priority here was getting the heck out of the workforce, getting out of corporate America. That was my number one priority. And I was willing to cut back on basically anything in order to achieve that. I loved going out to eat, for example. That was like my one thing that I loved doing because everyone, when you're out there, is happy. It's just an environment that I like to be in. But we cut our restaurant budget back to $50 a month while we were going through this process of achieving FIRE. And for me, that was a huge change because I was used to going out to eat once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week. But I was not able to do that. But again, there was that light at the end of the tunnel. There was that goal that I was shooting for. And ultimately, all of those sacrifices, and I use that term loosely, that I was making, I knew was going to a good cause, was going to our future happiness, as as a couple who doesn't have to work for a living anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. The reduction on cost of eating out, the traditional one that we all get shouted at as millennials is don't buy your kind of takeaway coffee every morning. That's $4 or $5 or pounds every day, so that compounds across the week. That stands out as a quick example to compound across the month, because imagine you were investing that 30-40 pounds per week across a month, then you're getting beyond your 10% straight away. What are some of the other areas that you were more frugal in?
Well, my wife and I talked about basically every single expense. And together we decided, yes, this is worth it, or yes, this is not worth it. And over time, we developed a pretty good process for developing or for deciding, maybe we don't need a new pair of jeans right now. And I mean, those seem small, but added up over the years, they really do become something so much bigger, almost the the result is bigger than the sum of their parts. I don't think I said that exactly right, but that's the concept that I'm trying to get across here. We really tracked our expenses too. For a couple years, my wife can tell you how much we spent on sweet potatoes at the grocery store. And you don't necessarily have to be that anal. You don't have to track your expenses to that degree. But if you don't know what you're spending on, it's going to be impossible to cut back because you don't know where your money is going. You don't know how much you're spending and on what. So cutting back is going to be very, very difficult. So I think the first thing that you should do, and the first thing that we did, is we sat down, looked at our bank statements, looked at our credit card statements, and we mapped out every place that our money is going. And once we had that foundation in place, it was very easy to tell, wow, we're spending $150 a month on cable. We're spending $45 a month on magazines. We're spending this here, this here, this here that we don't actually use. Those are easy things to cut back on. But because those were automatic deductions from our credit card, we never really noticed them. They just happened, even though we didn't really get a lot of value out of those expenses.
Yeah, that struck me as very interesting straight away, because what gets measured gets managed, and a lot of the listeners are from a very fitness focused background. And if you told them, for example, to lose weight for a holiday in 6 or 8 weeks' time, or a photo shoot, or however extreme their diet needed to be, best believe they'd be managing their calorie intake to the gram on MyFitnessPal. Whereas if you told somebody to manage their expenses in order to save for a house or a property or a new car or whatever they're looking to save towards, they would less likely take that focused, measured approach that you and your wife took to really understand where hundreds of dollars or hundreds of pounds a month were going towards, like different subscriptions, different magazines, different items in the supermarket, which were maybe better priced at another supermarket, or whatever it was you were doing. It just interests me so much that if you take a really strategic and measured approach to some areas of your life, of course it would benefit to take it in another area too.
Sure, sure. And I think the important thing to remember here is when you're setting goals, whether it's savings goals or fitness goals or whatever, I mean, they have to be tangible. So if your goal, I mean, your New Year's resolution is to lose weight, that's it, lose weight. You're probably not going to accomplish that because you have nowhere to go and you don't know when you're going to achieve that goal. Whereas I want to lose 50 pounds by March 1st. That's a very, very tangible goal. And the same thing it is very much in play with finances. I want to save X amount of money by X date, or I want to invest 20% of my salary by February, by March, or whatever. If you can get your goals to be as tangible and as like numbers based as you can, I think it's going to be way easier for you to keep yourself honest and make sure you're actually working to achieve that goal. And best yet, you'll know when you accomplish that goal, so you can reward yourself a little bit after you make that, after you satisfy that goal you had, which is always great, always great.
Yeah. Were there any mini rewards that you had along the way that you incentivized yourself with, or was it just this huge behemoth of a goal at the end of things?
Yeah, for us, it was more the end goal. I mean, every once in a while, maybe we go out for a nice dinner or something. But I mean, that wasn't really tied to a goal because we didn't have incremental goals. For us, we had that end goal, that big goal at the end. For us, that worked because we're very highly motivated people. But for a lot of people out there, that the same type of goal might not work. You might not want that big goal at the end. You want incremental goals. So instead of retiring by 45, it's maybe investing 20% by the time you're 40, investing 25% by the time you're 42, whatever. Those smaller goals that are more achievable, I think will work a lot better for a lot of people out there.
Yeah, if we're speaking about incremental and big things, one of my questions would be around what were some of the big things that started to free up your income? So I'm thinking like needle movers, like what did you do about your living situation? What did you do about your car? Because these are places that if I look at what I spend every month, that's where a lot of my money goes towards.
Yeah. So before we got married, I drove a brand new Cadillac CTS, a 1999 supercharged Corvette convertible, and a Yamaha R1 sport bike.
Steve, you are so
Boy,
American.
I am American to a fault sometimes, my friend. So, yeah, it was to say that I was having fun would be an understatement, but to say that I wasn't satisfied is also a big part of why we went through all of this. So yeah, getting rid of the extras that just cost so much money. I sold the Corvette. I ditched the sport bike. We kept the car because I had a zero interest loan on that thing. So for the most part, it was worth it. I moved out of my house and moved in with my wife in her house because, quite frankly, she had a better house. We rented my house for the first year, but I didn't like being a landlord. It's just not my thing. So we ended up selling that. So we downsized the house, we downsized the cars. We talked about every little thing that we spent money on. We tracked our expenses meticulously. That really, really, really helped get our expenses down. And I think one other thing that helped is my wife and I had a very, very open line of communication every single day. And I do mean that literally. After dinner, we would take our dogs, we had two dogs, take our dogs out and go for a walk in the neighborhood. And during that walk, we would talk about our future. We would talk about what we wanted things to look like. We would talk about what we wanted to do post retirement or even before that. We always talked about what we wanted. And I think that process kept that goal in our heads. It kept reinforcing the fact that, yes, what we're doing right now might feel like a sacrifice, but there's a good reason why we're doing that. And I think that reinforcement really created a healthy mindset for us to keep going down this road and keep saving and keep investing as much as we possibly can, foregoing some of those bigger purchases, maybe until later when we have a little bit more money and we have a better handle on this. But for now, we're doing well. We're working towards this huge goal, and it's always in our mind. And that helped a lot.
I really, really like that idea because particularly given the fact that there was two of you in this journey together, it wasn't Steve on a mission himself, where of course you would have some self-talk to keep yourself going and maybe checking in
Sure.
with yourself through journaling or whatever you were up to make sure you're in the right headspace. But when there's two of you, you both need to be on the same page at all times, because if one of you wavers, then it massively impacts the kind of, I don't want to say community feel, but the kind of aligned feeling between the two of you that we're working towards this, because you'll then resent the other for, oh, well, last week you spent that on coffee, or last week you spent that on those new jeans and I didn't.
Exactly. And this is going to be tougher for some people. My wife was pretty much on board from the very beginning. She never wanted to retire early, but she was always interested in entertaining better offers, and not working for the rest of her life. That was a better offer. But a lot of people listening might have a spouse who just has no interest in doing this whatsoever. And the difference between early retirement and being married to somebody who does not want to retire early and wants to spend and has, wants the nice things, that's a huge area that might seem like a struggle to close that gap a little bit. And you might not be able to close it completely, but if you do talk as much as you can, you might be able to close it a little bit, where you might not be able to retire at 40, but maybe at 45, maybe at 50. But the open line of communication is the only way that you and your spouse are going to get, even if it's not on the same page, even if it's in the same chapter or the same book, and that is way better than just being completely off the charts and going in completely different directions.
What were some of your influences that drove this decision making? Because you and I were talking before we hit record about role models and how important they are. What were some of those for you to really start this process?
Well, I have two main ones. First, my dad retired at 49. So he showed me what the value of saving and investing. Retired at 49. That's pretty good. I mean, that's, anything sub 50, I would say is really good early retirement. There was also a personal finance blogger, which I'm sure we've all heard of. His name is Mr. Money Mustache. He lives in Colorado. And I really connected with him, I'll say. He was also a software developer, and he was going through the same kinds of things that I was going through, made lots of money, but wasn't all that satisfied. And it was eerily similar to my situation. So I was like, okay, if this guy can do it, I probably could too. Because I don't think his wife was working, or if she wasn't making all that much. But my wife was making almost as much as I was. So I'm like, dude, if this guy can do it, I can certainly do it. So I really paid attention to what he was doing, what he was writing. And he has the writing style that I really connect with. It's like an in your face. He'll like cuss on his blog and things that connects with me. So it was an easy process for me to really connect with him and follow his journey and kind of shape ours in a similar fashion to what he did.
Yeah. Did
And
you have to
go
share
ahead.
did you have to share some of his content with your wife to get her on board, or were you kind of the middleman between the two?
I was more of a middleman. I mean, she may have read some of it, but she was never really a blog reader. That primarily came with me, came through me. And she was a bit of a saver anyway. My wife, that is. So I had that advantage too. She didn't necessarily want to retire early, but she was a much bigger saver than I was. So it wasn't really this uphill battle that I was afraid it might be.
Yeah. What was the number that the two of you were working towards? You're talking about in these dog walks. Like, what were you working towards that was, when I hit X number of $1,000 or X number $100,000, I am done?
Yep, that was a point of contention. I am a very risk tolerant person, and my wife is much less risk tolerant. She's more risk averse. So I was like, let's just do it at 600 grand. Let's do it. Let's go. Everything will be fine. And she's like, dude, no. I want more, like, I don't know, somewhere around 1 million or something. But the day that I retired, it was December 23rd of 2016, the best Christmas present I could ever give to myself, by the way. We had $870,000 in net worth at that time. Most of it was invested in the stock market. We had some real estate here or there, but the vast majority was stock market investments. So we were just under 900K when we called it quits. And through the power of the stock market and investing, we're at like 1.3 now, and we've never set foot in an office. And that's just that is just amazing to me.
Yeah, it's very interesting how you've managed to continue to grow your net worth without full-time work still. So you've not had that salary of 130, I think it was, that you called out. That's not been coming in annually. Instead, you've been benefiting from the compounding interest of previous investments and maybe investing some of the capital that you get now through your writing and your content creation.
That's right. That's right. I do. I mean, I don't get paid so much with writing, although it might be, I don't know, $500 a month or something. I legitimately write because I love it, not because I actually want to make money. I do some consulting work on the side, but all of that combined might bring in 40 grand a year, maybe. So, I mean, the majority of that isn't, I mean, I'm not getting rich based on income. It's the foundation that we built that allows compound interest and allows the stock market to do what it does best. And I mean, the stock market has a huge history, decades long history of growing as long as you have a long term mindset. And we absolutely do. So it's worked well for us.
Yeah, you guys weren't traders who were picking stocks and wheeling and
Oh,
dealing. You
no.
were much more along the lines of investing for the longer term so that in 5 years you could retire.
Yeah, I like to say on Twitter that 99% of people should be 100% index fund investors. And that I really firmly believe that. I am not smart enough to pick and choose stocks. I am definitely not smart enough to day trade. And I think a lot of people are in that boat, even though, I mean, some people just enjoy that process. So I don't think there's anything wrong with taking like a small percentage, 3, 4, 5% of your net worth and having fun with it. You know, trade, see what kind of money you can make. But if you're doing that for the majority of your portfolio, you either have to be good or you have to be lucky, or you're probably going to make more money just throwing it in the index funds and letting it grow.
Considering you just said you've got a really high risk tolerance, that slightly flies in the face of it, but it also doesn't, because you've got a risk tolerance in one particular area. You've got a risk
Yeah.
tolerance to being financially independent at a younger age or a lower amount of money, but you're not risk tolerant to the volatility of picking stocks.
Yes, I am risk tolerant, but yet I understand my weaknesses. And I'll be honest with you, investing is very boring to me. I don't want to pay attention to it. That's not my thing. That's not what makes me happy. I don't want to think about money and stocks and yields. And no, I don't want to do that. That's not why I retired. So yes, I am risk tolerant, but also I understand what's going to make me happy. So yeah, it might be more risky to pick and choose stocks and do more day trading, but frankly, that's just not what I want to do anyway. So it just worked out that there's something called index funds and mutual funds where they're automatically diversified. It's just so, it's like the easy button. It's the easy button to investing.
Yeah, well, myself and many people I speak to about this kind of thing love like trackers, the S&P 500 tracker or FTSE 250 tracker, and these businesses grow every single year. I know from working for big insurance firms in a previous career, they grow 6 to 10% every year. So best believe their stock price tends to reflect that in some shape or form. So when you are investing in these companies that all have these aggressive growth targets, you tend to end up in a better position across a period of time.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this saying, dude, I made double what you made because I know what to invest in. And yeah, first of all, good for you. You are way smarter than I am. I am proud of you. Good job. Keep doing what you're doing. But I will also say most people don't have the same mindset as you probably do. Some people just don't understand um, the market and investments the same way that you do. And quite frankly, if most people tried to do what you do, they're probably going to lose money because they just don't have that same mindset. So if it works for you, great. You could definitely make more money by picking and choosing stocks if you know what to do and you like doing it. But if you don't, don't feel like you have to do that before you start investing, because that's just not the case.
Yeah, again, like you say, I've got friends that got in on Tesla early. I got friends that bought when it dipped at the start of the pandemic, and they are
Yep.
rubbing their hands. But then, I mean, I got in on a special purpose acquisition company that merged and became
Mm-hmm.
Lucid, so electric car company.
Yep.
And I was excited about that, but I definitely got a little bit burnt when it first merged, because it went from like 50, $60 a stock to like 25, and it's only now back up at like 60, 70, 80. So it's only now back up. But at the time, I was rubbing my hands thinking, wow, I'm onto this really like amazing stock. Whereas if I put all the money I put into that into an S&P 500 tracker or a really simple index fund, then I would have not had the same volatility or the same stress level, and I'd probably end up in roughly the same position. I maybe wouldn't get the quite same excitement, but we're not in this game for excitement. We're in this game for financial independence.
Exactly. I firmly believe that for most people, investing should be boring. You throw your money in an index fund or mutual fund. You let compound interest do its job. Over time, you're gonna build wealth. It always happens.
Since you've retired, what does life look like now? You've given us a bit of an insight in terms you do some writing, you do some consulting. What does a day in the life look like if you don't have a 9 to 5?
Well, we get up. We've always been early morning people, so we get out of bed between 6:15 and 6:30 a.m. I would say. I really like to give back on social media. That's where I spend the majority of my time. I want to pay it forward with what Mr. Money Mustache gave me. So I want to be the Mr. Money Mustache for other people, and social media is the way that I'm doing that. I also have a blog that I do some writing on, but the majority of my time is on Twitter, writing about financial independence and money issues. So that takes up some of my time. We go on lots of walks. I might be on the tractor doing some work around the property out here. We have about 7 acres in the Arizona desert. Really, anything that I want to do, I do, and that's really the coolest part about this lifestyle. I'm a very internally motivated person, like I said before, so I'm almost never bored. There's always something I could be doing. I wrote an ebook. I wrote a book with a few other people that we just released. It's so nice to be able to create your day and do whatever you want every single minute of the day. That's going to scare a lot of people, by the way, but for us, it worked. It worked just beautifully.
Yeah, it aligned with your personality and your values, which is vastly important. You weren't just retiring for the sake of it. You were retiring because you knew what it would potentially look like for you, and it was a life that you aspired to.
Yep. That's right. There's a bell curve, and I if you're kind of half listening to this podcast while you're doing something else, take a break, stop what you're doing, and listen to this. Listen to this. Okay. Now there is a bell curve with early retirement, right? As you're going through your job, you want to escape from your job. You want to do something else, right? So you're relatively unhappy. You may not be miserable, but you're relatively unhappy. The day comes where you quit your job. Okay, good. What a relief. You no longer have your job. You're happier now. So your happiness level just skyrockets, right? It goes up, it goes up, it goes up. And you have the whole day to do whatever you want with it. Maybe watch Netflix or whatever, veg for a while. But after 2 or 3 weeks, you start to crest that bell. You start to get to the top of that bell curve, and your happiness level kind of levels off, because you're starting to think, yeah, this is cool, but I can't just watch movies all day. That's not the point of life. I don't feel productive. What am I doing here? And then if you keep going like that, you get to the other side of that bell where your happiness level actually begins to decrease, and you start heading right back down to where you were. And if you do that, that is a complete bell curve. Your happiness goes up, you level off, and then you go right back down. So when you think about early retirement, if that's like your goal, if that's your end goal, hobbies are going to be very, very important. Understanding what brings you fulfillment, what you're passionate about, and putting those pieces into place where when you get up in the morning, you actually have things that you want to do, rather than just sitting in the chair going, well, what am I going to do? I don't know. I got nothing to do. That never happens to me, but it does to a lot of people. And that's a process that you're going to have to work through. And I highly encourage you to start that process before you retire early, rather than saying, I'll just figure it out later. Because chances are you're not. And even if you do, it's going to be a very tough process. So if you can go through some of that work, that mental work, or maybe some experiments with your time before you retire, you can turn that bell curve into just a rise in happiness. And then you're just there. You just stay at the very top for as long as possible. And you don't dip back down because you have nothing to do with your time.
Yeah, a very, very powerful message because, like you say, some people might dream of all this free time, but when they have it, it's almost like a nightmare because they don't know what to do with it. They have
Yep.
no purpose, no fulfillment, no level of intrigue in their day. It's just flat and boring, and their mood obviously dips accordingly. Because when I was Googling about early retirement in preparation for this, Steve, I found that there's actually a trend towards early retirees dying younger
Mm-hmm.
than your average retiree, which struck me as quite unusual because I thought maybe they would have more time to be healthier, but it doesn't appear to be the case.
Nope. Nope. And I would say 100% of the people who may have died earlier because they retired early, not to do with health issues or anything else. I mean, it's because they don't feel fulfilled. And your heart just needs something, your heart and your mind really need to feel like there's a purpose. You're doing something either for you or your spouse or somebody else every single day. There needs to be something there that makes you happy, that fills your heart with pride and joy. And if you don't have that, it's going to be really, really tough to be successful at early retirement. In fact, you'll probably find yourself back at work again until you find that purpose.
It seems clear that you've found that. Are there any areas of stress that are left within your lifestyle? Are there areas that give you some sort of anxiety at times?
Really, no. There's if I know that sounds kind of trite to say. It's like, oh, I'm sure he has some stress. Literally, I do what I want. I really don't have stress, and I mean that. I mean that honestly. I really don't have stress. Early retirement for me has been everything that I thought it could be, but I also don't want people to listen to my words and think that early retirement is going to fix all of your problems, because in many ways they're going to make it worse, especially relationship problems. If you spend more time around your spouse and you have conflict before you retire early, uh, it might get worse. It might get worse if you spend more time around that spouse and you're not working towards something healthier. So early retirement is not like this be all end all. I'm going to be happy. Everything's going to be great. I don't want you to take that from my message. For us, it's great. But for you, there's going to be pieces that you're going to have to put into place to make sure that all of this free time that you have is making you happier and not making you more frustrated.
Yeah. I understand that your health improved significantly when you retired as well. Why do you think that was?
I I love the gym. I love going to the gym. And yeah, I did that a lot while I was working. But when I'm home, we have a home gym now because we have no gym around us. We're out in the middle of nowhere. I could work out every single day if I want. I don't necessarily work out every day, but I could. And I have a lot more time to make healthier meals. Like sometimes I'll make smoothies, sometimes we'll juice vegetables. We have there's a lot more opportunity for us to really dial in our fitness, dial in our health, so it works exactly the way that we want it to work. When we're at the office, it's just not the same. You have workers who want to go out for lunch, so you might feel compelled to do that, or go out for happy hours after work. Of course, those aren't healthy. They might be socially healthy, but they're certainly not physically healthy. We just don't have those draws anymore. So we're not tempted to be unhealthy with our lives in order to fit in socially, because we just don't have that influence. So for us, the time and the opportunity to be healthy expanded significantly when we didn't have our jobs.
Yeah, and you had a successful weight loss period where you've ended up in a much healthier space and you definitely feel like you've got more longevity now.
Yeah, I was, and this was back when I was working, but I was 70 pounds overweight when I moved from Virginia in the United States to Arizona. I made that move and I lived with a roommate in Virginia. We literally went out for lunch and dinner every single day of the year. 365 days a year, we went out to eat. We had the cleanest stove in the entire apartment complex because we never used it. That was like the most fun I've ever had in my life, putting on 75 pounds or something of additional weight. So when I moved out to Arizona, obviously I wasn't living with my roommate anymore. He stayed in Virginia, but I really started to put the pieces into place. Like I actually like going to the gym, and that weight fell off so quickly. And my main goal now is just maintaining what I have. And I mean, so far it's working well for me.
Yeah, fantastic. And we spoke about your net worth changing during this period. It's actually gone up the way based on compound interest and your investments.
Yep.
I understand under the principles of financial independence that your spending, in terms of even when you're retired, should fluctuate based on how well the market's doing and the returns that you get. What principles do you have in place? So, for example, if we have a dip like we did at the start of the coronavirus in March 2020, or we have a big bull run in the crypto space, if you've got any exposure to that, how does that change your spending?
Yeah, we spend the majority of our money, like I said, is in the stock market, is in index funds. So that's both good and bad. The good is we've had a bull market for like the last 3 or 4 years, right? So things have been things have been going very well for us financially. So we spend a little bit more money. Like last year, we spent $7,000 on a rental house in California for like the whole month of July. Certainly would not have done that if we had a down market. Part of our early retirement, I guess, deal that we have between my wife and I is if the market's down, we spend less. The market's up, we spend more. That's just the way it's going to be when you're heavily invested in index funds. You live and die by those index funds. We all know a recession's coming. Don't know when. Nobody knows when. If somebody tells you they know when, do not listen to that person ever again because they don't know. Nobody knows. We know it's coming. We don't know when. So right now, we're still we can probably spend a little bit more money. When that happens, when the recession happens, well, we're going to have to cut back. And that's one of the reasons why we live where we live. I like to say that we live in an off-grid recession-proof house because that's exactly what it is. We have solar panels, we have a well, we have septic on site, we have no grid ties whatsoever. We do have cell signal, so we get internet through T-Mobile. So I guess that might be a grid tie technically, but we provide all of our water, power, and solar just right here on site. So if we do have to cut back, we really can rein in our expenses and spend like almost nothing, which is so great.
Yeah, you love that control element and being decentralized, don't you? I can see that, Steve. I'm respecting that a lot.
Yeah, I don't like being tied to some entity or thing out there. We all are to a degree, but we do have some flexibility to get off of that a little bit, and we definitely did that. Speaking of decentralization, we have about 2 or 3% of our net worth in crypto. Bought some Bitcoin, bought some Ethereum. Both of those things went down right after I bought it. So I'm actually down with crypto. But again, I don't care. This is a long-term buy, just like with every other investment. It's a long-term buy. I know it's not always going to be that way. We just have to ride it out until things go back up again. But crypto is something that I've kind of just eased my way into. I'm not really all in yet. I mean, like 2 or 3% of our net worth. That's all we have. And for now, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, index funds are your bread and butter, and you mentioned a little bit of real estate as well.
Yep, we have the 7 acres that we have here on site, and there's lots of opportunities in our area to expand a little bit. So we're looking into those, looking into what might make sense from a real estate investment standpoint. So we're getting our feelers out there in the real estate market as well, just to diversify our investments a little bit further.
Yeah, and there's one final area that I'm really keen to dive in with you with, and it's around how people can still build wealth when they work in a 9 to 5, because it's clear that you did that with a high paying salary, but there's a bit of a misconception that people in a 9 to 5 maybe can't build wealth to the same extent. And equally, there's the reverse where super high earners like 100K, 200K, 300K plus, they're not necessarily wealthy because there's lots of smoke and mirrors, as you and I well know, or at least you certainly have spoken about before.
Yeah, there's a high income debt problem in the world, especially the US, but really in the world. There was a study by, I think it was Ramsey Solutions, that found 33% of millionaires never on average made more than $100,000 a year, but they're still millionaires, but without a high salary. The idea here, the key is, with regardless of how much money you make, if there is enough to save and invest, you do it. There's a couple of priorities that you have to keep in mind. Number one is an emergency fund. If you don't have about 3 months, I like to keep 6, but 3 is a good minimum as well. So if you lose your job today, how long do you have to go before you have to get another job again and start paying your bills? If you have a 3-month runway, then you may not feel quite as stressed, quite as frustrated. You might not be out on the street so quickly. So that emergency fund is crucial. So every single dollar you spend in a month, multiply that by 3. And I like to keep that in a separate savings account, not in your checking account because it's too easy to spend. Keep it separated in a savings account, which means it's easy to get to, but yet it's not right there. You're not tempted to spend it. And some savings accounts have like a small interest rate involved. So you might make some money. You're not going to make much. You might make some money. So your emergency fund is priority number 1, always, always, always. Number 2 is investing. Do not start investing until you have an emergency fund. That's so important. I will say it again. Don't start investing until you have an emergency fund. Because if your roof springs a leak and you don't have an emergency fund, what happens? You are in debt and you are paying that interest instead of getting it. So we are now on to investments. Like I said before, traditionally, 10%, save 10% and you'll be good to go. I don't like that advice. I understand that some people might not make enough to save more than 10%, or you might not even make enough to save 10%. For now, that's fine. The idea here is just to get into the habit of investing. There's lots of different options to invest. Frankly, I don't know a lot about the UK retirement accounts, but in the US, we have traditional 401ks, we have Roth IRAs, we have HSAs. Those are company sponsored, which means they're very easy to get into. You tell your company you want to donate, you want to contribute, X amount of your check, comes out automatically. You set it up once, you never have to worry about it again.
Yes,
by the end of our careers,
in the UK, we can turn up our pension allocation and it goes into a fund, and the company quite often will match the percentage that you do as well. So it's a great way to get free money effectively.
Perfect. Yeah. In the US and in traditional 401ks, a lot of companies will match a certain percentage as well, like 3, 4, 5%. And that is literally free money. They are contributing their money into your retirement account as long as you contribute that same amount. So definitely take advantage of that. And I mean, if you can save 20 or more percent, if you can invest 20 or more percent of your paycheck, then you are really setting yourself up to not only retire, but maybe even retire before you expected. And your lifestyle is going to be that much more satisfying because you're going to have you're going to have that nest egg in the future to look forward to when that time comes.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And what about when it comes to within your 9 to 5, how can you start to generate more salary in a shorter period of time? Because I know that you're quite passionate about maximizing your earning power while in the 9 to 5 grind.
There's a couple ways. The first one is, it might be the easiest way, but it's hard for a lot of people. It's just asking for a raise. You have to pick and choose your time. It's not always going to be simple for a lot of people. You have to, you kind of have to have your ducks in a row. Make sure you have a lot of accomplishments under your belt. So you're not going into your boss saying, I need more money. You're going into your boss saying, I deserve more money because I accomplished this and this and this and this, or comparable comparable positions are paying this and this and this, but I'm only making this. So I would, I need to talk about that. Or there are promotional opportunities within your same company. If you find a role that comes up, could always apply for it. If you have a good relationship with your boss, you might just have a discussion with him or her saying, I want to elevate my career. If there's anything that comes up, let me know. What can I do to start preparing myself for that next step? And even if there isn't something right then, I mean, I used to be the director of IT in an organization. And if one of my employees came to me and told me that, they are going to be my first pick, as long as their accomplishments meet what they just told me, because I know that they're working towards something better. They're motivated to level up. And I always liked to see that. But what I always did also in my career is I moved around. Every 3 or 4 years, I was out the door. I was at a new job. And that's a perfect opportunity to negotiate a higher salary when you take another role. I probably increased my salary 25 to 30% every single time I moved. And for me, that was a huge factor in leveling up and increasing my salary every 4 or 5 years. I still got the cost of living increases, but moving companies, that's when you really see the increase in pay.
Yeah, because if you look at what you maybe get in your annual appraisal, 3%, 4%, sometimes even less than that, or
Yep.
you get a promotion internally, it might be, the bracket goes up 10%. That's great. But when you move company, you're in a much stronger position because that company needs to fill a vacancy and they like you. It's you that's the piece of talent, and what you earn beforehand often becomes inconsequential because you didn't earn it at that business. So it's less a case of, oh God, we've given him an extra 20%. It's more a case of, oh well, we've hired Steve for X £1,000 because we think he's worth it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And really the benefits go beyond money. You're also expanding your network. You just doubled your network or tripled or whatever. You're getting exposure to new professionals, and all those people's networks just kind of implicitly by third degree become available to you as well. You're getting exposed to new technologies, new software, new processes. All of that makes you a more experienced, smarter, well-connected person. I highly, highly recommend moving around. Now, it is true that if you move around too much, like every year or two, that might be too much because your next employer might take a look at your resume and think that you're just going to be gone in a year and throw your resume out. I mean, hiring people is not cheap. So you need to, I mean, based on your industry, there's going to be pros and cons to moving around. But if you've worked in your industry enough, you probably understand how much you can move while minimizing your chances of not getting the job because you move around too much.
Yeah, there'll be social norms in any sector where if somebody gets known as jumping from company to company, of course that'll put you in trouble. Particularly if you're like I'm primarily in sales roles, so if I was moving around all the time, I'd be under covenant all the time, so I couldn't actually bring a lot of value for 6 months wherever I went. But it's certainly a fast track to dramatic percentile increases versus your traditional increases. So I find that very, very valuable, Steve. And on that debt piece for high earners, why do you think that is, that people just, regardless of if they're maybe a very, very high earner, they're still perhaps in debt? What do you think's driving that?
That's a really good question. There's a couple of factors I think that are in play. A lot of times when you're in a high salary position, you are expected to look the part, right? You don't want to drive up to, I mean, if you're a lawyer, for example, you probably don't want to drive up to a client meeting in a beat up Corolla. You want to drive up in a Mercedes or a BMW or whatever. So you look like you are successful. You look like you make a lot of money. And that in turn is going to make more money for you if you're in that kind of a role. So that's one area, just the expectation to look the part. But I think another area here is just people who make a lot of money and want to enjoy it. They want the nicer things in life. They might think that they might tell themselves that they deserve the house on the hill or the expensive car or the expensive jewelry or the jet skis or the pool or whatever, simply because they make that money, they think that they need to spend it because they earn it, they work hard, and they deserve these things. And to a certain degree, I mean, I think there's validity in that. You certainly can't live your life that feels like a sacrifice. So, I mean, if you do make a lot of money, you probably could afford that car, that nice house. But the problem comes when you do everything, when you have the car and the house and the pool and the jet skis and the season tickets. All of those things add up to a high income, but not a high net worth, not a high wealth. And that is ultimately what's going to enable you to retire. Your income doesn't enable retirement. I'll say that again. Your income does not enable retirement. Your net worth does. The money that you have, the assets that you have, minus the liabilities that are working against you, that is your net worth. And that is how you're going to retire.
Yes, Steve, what a mic drop moment to wrap up on. I absolutely love that message. If people would like to continue the conversation with you, Steve, where should they head towards?
Well, the most active place I am is Twitter, and my handle is Steve on Speed. That might make some of you giggle. I created this account way back when I drove my Corvette. So I was addicted to going fast and nearly killing myself. So that's where the on speed part comes. But Twitter on Steve on Speed. I have a blog at steveadcock.us. Those are the two main areas that you can find me.
Both of those will be linked in the show notes below. And I've gone deep on the blog and I've been loving the content. So thoroughly comes recommended from me. If you guys have enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot, pop it on your Instagram story, tag me at call.cambro, copy and paste the link to a friend that needs to learn more about financial independence. And I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.